When the unsolved cases go cold, they eventually end up in this small room. Inside the boxes,
The paper's even old.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
files where you can see and almost smell the time that's passed.
A heart-wrenching tragedy comes to a family's doorstep.
Tonight on a 40-year-old
His death was a homicide, but his killer
And
remains
when
on the
police
loose.
can't find the
Police are
murderer,
telling us as many as 10
This was
other
the most
unsolved
heinous, cold-blooded murder case he's ever encountered.
You stab, you stab, you stab.
According
you
tonight,
stab
an arrest in the
until he was
rape
dead.
and murder of a woman killed 17 years
townsfolk
ago.
start whispering among themselves and pointing fingers at those suspects and tales lead nowhere.
You may not remember their names, but these are the faces of hundreds of victims who've been murdered.
1975.
Cops say an unexpected break in this tragic cold case
40 years ago.
Their cases remain unsolved.
Even though they couldn't tie anyone to the crime.
We have a lot of information.
hundreds of murder
but we
cases yet to be solved.
We're always a little bit short of putting
Rumors
it
started coming in, or the stories started coming in from the street.
Maybe their conscience just got to them after all these years. That, you know what, maybe I better talk.
Why would you keep this information if you have it? Why would you keep it? A man has died here. Let's bring it to the surface.
She deserves justice. This needs to be solved.
"31-year-old Larry Costine and 26-year-old Melissa Jo Sermons spent their last night at a rodeo together, and it sounds like a good time was had by all. Well, until they got a flat on the long drive home. They did manage to fix it, and then they got some breakfast, because it was already bearing down on the next morning. They arrived home just after 4 a.m. to Larry's double-wide trailer in a very rural area of Lakeland, Florida. Their rodeo is a Saturday night, and by Monday nobody could get a hold of either Joe or Larry. This season is about victims slipping through the cracks of our justice system and what it looks like when the state attorney makes one last Hail Mary pass. September 12th, 2022. We are in a Bartow, Florida courthouse in Polk County. An all-female jury has been impaneled and sworn in, and Assistant State Attorney Mark Levine begins his opening statement.
Ladies, the year was 1991. Melissa Jo Sermons was in her 20s, and she was living with her mom, June Freeman, and with Melissa's sister, Melanie Goebel, in Lakeland. And you're going to hear and see evidence that Melissa Jo, and she went by the name Jo, that's what everybody called her, Jo worked at a series of cattle auctions in Lakeland, Kissimmee, and Tampa. And you'll hear that she was a young lady that would go to work and work hard. And she met a gentleman by the name of Danny Cerezo, the defendant, in 1991. You're going to hear that the defendant was an inspector for the state of Florida, and he inspected cattle. And on a certain day, their paths crossed. And as you'll see from the evidence, that would have huge implications for Melissa Jo Sermons and for Larry Costine. Now you're going to hear the name Larry Costine because he was a young man in his 30s that was a Southern gentleman. He was a cowboy. He rodeoed. He worked with steer his whole life. And you're going to hear that the defendant around this time in 1991 was about 43 years old, so considerably older than Joe. Well, the defendant and Joe started up a relationship and they became boyfriend and girlfriend. And you're going to hear that Joe actually moved in with the defendant. Now, the defendant lived all the way over on the East Coast, in DeLand, Florida. And you will hear that the defendant would work at these different auctions in those 3 cities that I mentioned, as would Joe. And there would be occasions when he might spend the night with a co-worker, but his place that he lived in was in DeLand. Now, around this time, there was a man named Larry Costine. And as I mentioned before, he also worked in the industry, and he knew somebody named Stephen Collins. Stephen Collins, you're going to hear, was a teenager at that time, about 15 or 16 years old, and they would go to rodeos together. They would do team roping and different types of competitions. Now, at a certain point, as this relationship progresses, 1991 turns into 1992, and you're going to hear that Joe had seen the relationship run its course. From her point of view, the defendant was obsessive with her. You're going to hear that he always wanted to be controlling and know where she was and what she was doing, who she was talking to. And it became so bad that Melissa Jo dumped him. She broke off the relationship. That was in 1992, roughly around February or April, and the defendant was furious, to say the least. And you're going to hear and see firsthand some of the things that the defendant did, such as having his former son-in-law drive in the middle of the night all the way from DeLand in the defendant's daughter's car so that he could go spy on Ms. Sermons.
At the end of his opening statement, Levine gets to the actual matter at hand.
Now, as the investigation continued, the year is 2014, August 28th, and the defendant, Danny Cerezo, is brought before the grand jury with a grand jury subpoena. Mr. Cerezo could not hide from that subpoena. He had to show up. They compelled him to show up and testify before the grand jury. And as you'll see and hear, the grand jury was being conducted by a prosecutor, an assistant state attorney, and you are going to be able to hear firsthand exactly what was said by the prosecutor and exactly what was said by the defendant. So I'm not going to go over it word for word, but some of the important points are that it was made clear to the defendant that he was there for a first-degree murder investigation. And you'll hear first-degree murders are, of course, capital offenses. And you're going to hear the long, solemn, important oath that witnesses take that appear before a grand jury. And you're going to hear that he was sworn in and everything was explained to him and he understood it. Now, as you'll hear, the grand jury's role is to get information, evidence, and truth. And you're going to hear that if the grand jury is lied to, how can the truth come out? And when the defendant decided to consciously and purposely lie to the grand jury to try to cover up whatever you think he was covering up, whatever motivated him, the defendant told a series of lies despite being sworn in to tell the truth. And when witnesses lie in front of the grand jury, that is a crime. And that is why the defendant is here before you ladies today.
So the first witness is Stephen Collins. He was a teenager at the time that Larry Costine was killed, and he's the young man who went with Larry and Joe to the rodeo that night. Larry picked him up first. He said everyone was in good spirits, and he and Larry won a team roping event that night. Stephen said that they left somewhere around midnight or 1 a.m. after all of the events and, chatting with people, but that on the way home they caught a flat tire, which he described as a tire blowout on the trailer, and it took them a bit of time to figure out how to put a temporary fix on it to get home. We thought Larry had a spare, but he didn't end up, so he just took the tire off himself and used a strap just to kind of ratchet strap the axle up to where we could get it back in. After fixing the tire, the three stopped to get breakfast at an all-night diner, and this witness said that they made the long drive home after that, and he figured that he got dropped back off at his house around 4 a.m. Stephen said he called the next day on Sunday because they usually practiced on Sundays with the horses, and there was no answer, and he never heard from Larry again. The next witness was Nancy Shipman, who would have been the crime scene investigator back in 1992. And when they were going over aerial shots of Larry's house, the state attorney said,
"Down here, does that look like a horse trailer with some horses?"
And on the stand she responded, "Yes, I don't know if there were horses. Oh, I see them, yes." So Nancy Shipman described Larry's home as orderly and neat. There was no sign of it being ransacked or forced entry. Her report stated that all the doors were locked and secured except for a sliding glass door that was unsecured but shut. She said the radio was on and a country music station was playing. Larry was found in his bedroom on the floor on some sheets at the end of the bed. He was described as laying face down, kind of on his side. There were some pieces of wood on the ground in the bedroom, and they were described as wooden slats, some of which were leaning against the wall behind the bedroom door. Some of these wooden slats had apparently fallen down, I guess suggesting some sort of activity around them. Because they found blood on the bottom back side of the bedroom door, I wonder if someone had possibly been hiding behind that door, lying in wait for them when they arrived that night, and at some point that bedroom door had been at least some of the way closed by the time gunplay was involved. That would explain why there's blood on the back or inside of the door. Now, Larry was described as nude except for socks, and there was clothing beside the bed, a pair of jeans, a shirt, and his belt. What was absent, notably, was any sign of Joe or her clothing. And when he was later asked on the stand, an investigator indicated there was no sign that Joe had been in that room at all. Nancy Shipman described seeing an entrance wound in Larry's shoulder and a lot of blood around his head when she first observed him. A projectile was found near his body, and she indicated later in the testimony that it was found beneath his head. A bone fragment was found on the dresser, which indicates he was shot in that bedroom, and it's likely, based on the evidence, that everything that occurred happened in that room, at least to him. At autopsy, investigators observed a bullet hole in the back of Larry's head, another in his left upper back shoulder area, and another on his face in the forehead area. There was also one on his forearm. Lividity was observed on the side of his body that was laying on the ground. The next witness was Detective Brian Price, and some of the things that came out in his testimony, as I said, was that Melissa Jo Sermons, there was no indication she had been at the scene. She was initially considered a suspect, but at some point they believed she was a missing person and possibly a victim. The detective noted that they had gotten a wiretap for the family home to see if any calls came in from Melissa Jo to her family, and they also intercepted her mail at the post office, but there was never any communication from her to the family. Also on the stand, he talked about how Melissa's mother and her sister had passed away during this decades-long investigation. So this was a 3-day trial, and I just told you everything that happened on day 1, except for the last thing that occurred, which was they played the audio of Danny Cerezo testifying before the grand jury, which was the testimony that had gotten him in the hot water in the first place.
I need you to just have a seat there, Mr. Cerezo. Alright, now I am going to start talking to you today about an event that occurred sometime in 1992. I'm going to ask if you recognize the names of a few people. Do you know, or did you know a woman by the name of Melissa Jo Sermons?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and how was it you knew Ms. Sermons?
Through the markets.
She worked at the markets as well as you did?
Yes, sir. You have all this on record from when you subpoenaed me the first time. I can't remember that far back.
That's fine. We'll get into what you remember and what you don't remember. Now, Melissa Jo, she worked at the market with you said. Did you two start dating?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall how long you dated Melissa?
No, sir.
Was it more than just a couple months?
I don't remember.
Did she live with you?
She'd come and stay a little bit with me, yes, sir.
You say a little bit. How long is a little bit?
I don't remember.
Alright, if I told you that you had said to the detective that she lived with you for 14 months back then, would that sound accurate?
If that's on a sworn document that I gave back then, yes, sir, that would be exact.
And did you also know a gentleman by the name of Larry Costine?
I knew of him. I didn't know him personally.
Okay, you knew who he was.
From around the markets.
These markets, I'm assuming this is the Tampa market, the Lakeland market, and the Kissimmee market, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did Melissa work at all 3 markets with you?
I don't recall if it was all 3 at the time. I don't.
Okay, it was certainly some of them.
Yes.
Okay, and your testimony today is that you don't recall how long you were dating Melissa?
No, sir. It's been a long, long time ago.
Well, I mean, it's someone you lived with, Mr. Cerezo.
I cannot remember.
Are you currently married?
Yes, sir.
And what's your wife's name?
Maria.
And how long have you been married to Maria?
Going on 14 years, 15 years, somewhere around there.
Now, back in 1992, was your brother Danny? Was he staying there in DeLand with either yourself or your parents?
My brother Danny.
Well, Joseph. I'm sorry, your brother Joseph.
Was he what?
Staying there in DeLand with either yourself or your parents.
He wasn't staying with me.
Okay, was he staying at your parents' place?
I don't remember.
Okay, who were you living with at that time in your home?
Some of my kids.
Which ones?
You said that when Melissa Jo was living there too, so I guess that would be in the same time frame?
I'm not saying that. That's why I asked you that. Was Melissa ever living with you at the time?
She stayed with me a little bit, but I don't remember exactly how long or who all was living there at the time.
You remember her staying there a little bit, and you're not going to say that she lived with you?
Well, what's considered living with me?
Did she sleep at your house with you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, did she keep clothes there?
She brought clothes, yes, sir.
Any personal belongings? Did she have any of those there? Toiletries, toothbrush, things like that?
I'm sure she did.
Okay. And you're saying if you told the detectives back in 1992 that she stayed there or she actually lived there for 14 months, then that would have been a true statement at the time?
If I said 14 months back then, I cannot remember, sir. If that's what it was, that was right at the time.
Okay, and you said that some of your kids were living with you there in DeLand at the time that Melissa was staying there. Was your daughter staying there at the time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and how about her boyfriend?
Yes, sir.
Is that the only people you can remember living there? Jeff Farr, Diana, and Melissa Jo, and yourself? Is there anyone else living in the house at the time that you remember?
I can't remember, sir. There was 3 or 4 of them living there, but I don't remember exactly how many and who all was there.
Now, at some point in time during the relationship, did you and Melissa Jo Sermon split up?
Yes, sir.
Did she move out, take all her belongings with her?
Yes, sir.
And did you cease to date at that point in time?
No, sir.
Okay, did you break up with her or not? That's the question.
Yes, sir. I misinterpreted you there, and in other words, I thought you were asking me did I cease to date. Did her and I cease to date? Yes, sir.
Melissa Jo Sermons and yourself
Yes, sir.
broke up.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and do you know how long it was when you broke up until the time that she disappeared?
No, sir.
Does it seem to be a long time or a short time?
I don't remember, sir. That was a long, long time ago.
Well, let me put it in this context, Mr. Cerezo. How many times have you dated someone and lived with them, and then they disappear off the face of the earth? This isn't just some high school sweetheart from your hometown.
This was my first time.
Okay, and would you agree that that kind of stands out in your memory? Or it should?
Like I said, I cannot remember that long ago.
Was it a year afterwards that she disappeared and you broke up? Was it a month?
I do not remember, sir.
And that's your answer. So you don't remember?
No, sir.
Okay, now, when you broke up with Melissa, or she broke up with you, however it went, did you continue to work with her at the markets?
I'm assuming she was still there.
Okay, well, let me ask it this way then. Did you follow her around at the market?
No, sir.
Did you spy on her while she was working at the market?
No, sir.
Did you hide behind some cow pen boards and watch her while she was writing tickets out on the receiving and loading deck?
No, sir.
How would you describe your behavior once you broke up with Melissa Jo? Kind of depressed and sad?
No, sir.
Now, did you still know Melissa Jo's mother after you broke up with her?
What do you mean by that?
Did you still talk to her on the phone sometimes? Did you continue to farrier her horses, trim their hooves?
I don't remember that, sir.
Did you ever call their home after you broke up?
I don't remember that neither.
You don't remember ever calling Melissa Jo's house after you broke up with her?
No, sir. Not that long ago.
All right. Did you ever go from DeLand or wherever you were at the time to Melissa Jo's house to watch her at her home in Lakeland, where she was living with her mother?
No, sir.
Did you ever follow Melissa Jo in your truck or in any automobile?
No, sir.
Did you ever go to the home and look in the windows and attempt to see what she was doing or who was talking inside the home?
No, sir.
Now, Jeff Farr, the gentleman that's living with your daughter, did you ever ask him and have him drive you to Melissa's house so that you could look into her windows at night?
No, sir. Kind of crazy to drive 300 miles or however far it was.
I would agree. Is that about what it is, round trip?
I have no idea.
It's not close by, is it?
No, sir, it's not. It's about a 2-hour drive.
After you and Melissa broke up, do you recall asking various people, co-workers in the markets, the 2 gentlemen at the state you worked with, if Melissa was dating or seeing anybody?
No, sir, I don't.
Did you ask about Joe often at the market when you were like, where's Joe? Where's Joe today?
No, sir, not that I remember.
Did you know that Melissa Jo, and again, I call her Joe or Melissa Jo, she went by a nickname. Did you know her full name's Melissa Jo?
If that's what you say.
No, I want you to tell me. What did you call her?
Joe.
Okay, now after y'all broke up, did you know that she was dating Larry Costine?
No, sir.
Did you ever see or did you know of her dating any other men?
No, sir, I didn't keep tabs on her.
So you didn't keep tabs on her like that?
No, sir.
Went your own way, parted ways, and that was it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, did you ever have any arguments with her about trying to get back together with her, where she would get angry?
No, sir, not that I remember.
All right, so it sounds like it was just kind of an amicable joint decision to part ways, and nobody had any hard feelings either way.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now when Melissa Joe disappeared, did you get worried about her? Concerned at all?
I was up there.
You were up there where?
At home.
Were you speaking about that weekend, that Saturday night into Sunday?
Whenever. I was never down here. I was living up there.
Well, certainly you'd been to Lakeland because you worked there at least one day a week.
Yes, sir, with my co-workers.
All right. Now, had you ever been to Melissa Joe's house in Lakeland, or her mother's house?
Yes, sir, in the past.
All right, so you knew where she lived in Lakeland?
Yes, sir.
We're speaking about that weekend, which the dates were actually May 2nd, was a Saturday, on into May 4th, which would have been a Monday. That weekend when she disappeared and that Mr. Costine was killed. Your testimony is that you were in DeLand at your house?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever tell anybody that you went to the Crow's Nest bar that Saturday night?
I don't remember.
Did you go to the Crow's Nest bar?
Don't remember that neither.
Now, that Monday, when Melissa didn't show up for work and Larry's body was found later that night, were you concerned at all that Joe hadn't shown up or hadn't been to work on into Tuesday, the next day?
I don't remember the dates and all that you're telling me.
Well, the weekend, when I talked about when Mr. Costine was shot and Melissa was last seen alive. The question is, that week when you started working at the market on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, were you concerned at all? Were you asking about Melissa Joe?
I don't remember.
Again, this is someone that you had just stopped living with, that you had dated for some time. You don't remember what your reaction was?
No, sir, that was 20 years ago.
Okay, I agree, and as I stated, we're not talking about just some acquaintance that you met or what you had for dinner that week. We're talking about a woman who lived with you, who was your girlfriend, who disappeared off the face of the earth, and you're telling the members of this grand jury that you don't remember what your reaction was?
No, sir.
Now, before you met Melissa Joe, were you also married to a different woman?
Yes, sir.
And what was her name?
Dreama.
Now, do you remember when you would be working at these auctions, talking about Tampa, Lakeland, Kissimmee, any other auctions you worked at in the state, if you would sometimes stay not in DeLand but at a friend's house so that you didn't have to travel all the way back to DeLand?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and with various friends, not just one person?
Yes, sir.
All right, now did you ever talk with them about your relationship with Melissa Joe after the breakup?
Not that I remember.
Do you know a man, or did you know a man in the past named Doug Morgan and his wife?
Yes, I know a Doug Morgan.
Now, have you seen that gentleman in a long time?
I don't recall. He never tried to see me ever, and I can't remember how long it's been.
Now, Mr. Cerezo, did you ever ask Diana or Jeff Farr to lie to the police and tell them that you had been home that weekend in DeLand when Melissa disappeared and Larry was killed?
No, sir.
Now, Mr. Cerezo, have you ever been to Larry Costine's trailer in North Lakeland?
No, sir.
Is there any reason that your fingerprints would be anywhere inside that trailer or on any objects on that property?
No, sir. If I don't know where it's at, I've never been there and they can't be there.
Mr. Cerezo, speaking about Doug Morgan, did you ever borrow any firearms from him?
No, sir.
All right, I don't have any further questions for you, Mr. Cerezo, at this time. Some members of the grand jury might. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Cerezo?
Did you talk about it at work back then?
I didn't talk about it, but I wondered where she was, you know. They would sometimes call in sick or not show up for work, you know, but...
Were you and Melissa engaged during your relationship?
No, ma'am. We just dated for a short period of time.
Who broke up the relationship?
She said she needed space. It was kind of a mutual agreement.
So, the breakup was a mutual agreement between you and Joe, Melissa Joe Sermons?
She said she wanted space, and we agreed.
And you weren't bothered by that?
No, sir.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Cerezo?
Day 2 of grand jury testimony began with Jeffrey Farr, the son-in-law of Danny Cerezo. He lived in the same home as Danny, so was there to see his relationship with Joe. The reason that the state brought this witness was to describe a single incident, essentially. And here's a recreation of that excerpt from the trial transcript.
Now, I want to ask you about an incident that happened shortly before the murders. Was there a night where the defendant asked you to go to Lakeland with him?
Yes.
And do you recall what vehicle he asked you to take him in?
Yes.
And what vehicle was that?
A Toyota Tercel.
And whose car was that, the Toyota Tercel?
That was Diana's car, my wife at the time.
What kind of vehicle did you have, like, in general?
I had a pickup.
And what about the defendant? What did he have?
A pickup.
Was there any reason why? Was your pickup truck working back then?
Yes.
Was the defendant's pickup truck working back then?
Yes.
Okay, but he wanted to go in Diana's silver Tercel?
Yes.
Okay, so that night, do you remember driving in that Tercel with the defendant all the way from DeLand to Lakeland?
Yes.
And where did the defendant ask you to take him?
Melissa's mother's house.
About how long is that drive, do you know?
I don't know for sure. Maybe an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours.
Okay. During the drive, did he ever tell you why he was having you take him in the middle of the night to Melissa Joe's house?
No.
During the drive, did you guys make it to the area of Melissa Joe's house?
Yes.
And did you know how to get there from being there before?
Me, personally, no.
Did the defendant kind of give you the directions of how to get there?
Yes.
Was anyone else in the car besides you and the defendant?
No.
Did the defendant tell you where to stop as you got closer to Melissa Joe Sermon's house?
Yeah.
And did you guys pull up in the driveway and honk the horn?
No, sir.
Where did he have you stop in the middle of the night?
We pulled up past the house.
And when you guys were about to stop, did the defendant tell you how to stop?
Yes. He said pull the emergency brake so the brake lights won't come on.
And is that a thing that actually accomplishes the brake lights not going on if you pull the emergency brake?
I'm assuming it did. I don't know. I didn't see it.
Okay, fair enough. So he asked you to pull the emergency brake so the brake lights wouldn't go on?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now, did the defendant get out of the car in the middle of the night?
Yes.
And did he then go and do whatever he did at Melissa Joe Sermon's house?
Yes.
Did you remain in the car?
Yes, I did.
Did some time pass while you stayed in the car by yourself?
Sometime.
Did the defendant come running back to the car at some point?
He came back, yes.
Did he get back in the car?
Yes, sir.
Did you take off immediately, or did you wait to hear what he had to say?
No, he said, let's go.
Okay, and did he tell you where to go?
We went back to DeLand.
Okay, so it was and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a round trip, meaning from DeLand back, or to Lakeland back to DeLand, all in one night, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
At some point, did it become known to you that Melissa Joe Sermons had vanished and that Larry Costine had been murdered?
Yes.
And did you ever see or hear from Melissa Joe Sermons again?
No.
The next witness was Cher Stepp. Cher also worked at the livestock markets with Joe.
I mean, there'd be times when he'd be crouched down and peering at us between the boards, trying to hear what we were saying, when we were all three walking down the alley together. If we go to lunch, he'd follow us to lunch. It's, like I said, it was odd. It was like any given time you turn around and he'd be there watching us. Watching Joe, I should say.
And did Joe begin to become concerned about her safety as his actions progressed?
Yes.
Did you become concerned about the defendant's actions based on what you were seeing him do? Were you concerned for Melissa Joe's safety?
Yes. He always watched Joe. Always.
And was that part of his job or no?
No.
And would the defendant talk to you frequently regarding his displeasure with her breaking up with him?
Yes.
Did you ever see towards the end that the two of them were arguing at all?
Yes.
Now describe to the jury what you saw in that respect.
It would be a heated discussion from a distance that couldn't be heard because of all the noise, the cows and yelling and, just the noise. But you could tell they were in heated discussions.
After the breakup, did Joe try to stay away from the defendant?
Yes.
And after Joe dumped the defendant, did the defendant continue on with the actions that you've described up until she was murdered?
Yes, if anything, it seemed like it got worse.
The next witness was Sherry Spurlock. In 1992, she worked for a software company that Joe's sister also worked for, and she was close with the family. At the time, she lived off a dirt road called J.A. Fenton Road, at the end of which Melissa Joe's mother, June, had leased 1,500 acres, where their horses that weren't on their property stayed in that pasture. Sherry Spurlock testified that that dirt road was mostly used by people who lived on that road, and that was important here because she testified that when Melissa Joe moved home after breaking up with Danny, there were times that they would see Danny's truck going down J.A. Fenton Road, which she reiterated was a dirt road not traveled by people unless they had a specific purpose to be there. It was very rural. She said, quote, most of the time either somebody was lost or they didn't have a reason to go down that street unless you were coming to see somebody that lived on the homestead. She was also witness to one of the important incidents related to these perjury charges. Sherry described an incident that occurred when Melissa Joe was visiting her at her home. Her mobile home faced the dirt road and her kitchen sink faced the backyard, which butted up to a wooded area. She and Melissa Joe saw Danny out her back window. He had not been invited, and there was no purpose for him to be there. She was concerned because this was after they had broken up, and Sherry had worked for the FBI when she was younger, and she was so worried about this that she begged Melissa Joe to get a restraining order against Danny so he would stop. Sherry told the jury about the last time she saw Joe, that first weekend in May of 1992. She was with her while Melissa Joe got ready for her date with Larry that Saturday night. She said Melissa Joe was in a good mood. She was excited and looking forward to the evening. Now, fast forward to the following Monday, she and Melissa Joe's sister were carpooling to work, and Melanie was upset that they hadn't been able to get in touch with her sister and nobody had seen her. Sherry was able to leave work that day, and Melanie, Joe's sister, wasn't. So she asked Sherry if she would swing by the livestock market where Melissa Joe was scheduled to work and see if she was there. And Sherry did that, but Joe hadn't shown up. Sherry knew Danny as well, and she said usually when she would show up at the market, he would take every opportunity to approach her and ask about Melissa Joe. But that day, she said he made eye contact with her, but nothing more. Sherry then spoke to Erlo Costine, one of Larry's uncles, and she expressed a concern on behalf of the family at not being able to find Joe. Erlo gave Melissa directions to where Larry lived, and then after work, Sherry and Melissa drove over there to Larry's trailer. They saw his truck with the horse trailer still on it. They pulled up and honked the horn, and nobody came out. She said Larry's dog was there, and they didn't feel safe getting out of the truck, so she finagled her vehicle up close to Larry's truck so Melanie could reach out and feel the hood to see if it was hot. But it wasn't. The two women headed home, and they contacted Erlo Costine again, telling him what they had found, and he said he would go out and look himself. On cross-examination, Danny Cerezo's lawyer got this witness to concede that maybe Danny hadn't seen her that day at the auction, and that's why he never approached her. Then he asked her about the road that they lived on, where she had said generally it was only people who lived there who would have reason to go down it, unless they got lost. Danny's lawyer was able to get her to concede that Danny was a farrier, and he had actually cared for Joe's mom's horses at some point. And remember, she had horses out at the end of that road where she leased the property. Because Joe's mother had died by the time of the proceedings that I'm referencing, I think it would be helpful to read to you what she had said during her deposition regarding Danny working for her as a farrier relative to her daughter's breakup with him.
He'd call, and she wouldn't talk to him. The day that she disappeared, he called her. And her exact words, I'm not being vulgar now, she said, I don't want to talk to you. Leave me the fuck alone. I'm through. Leave me the fuck alone were her exact words. Her last words I heard her say to him.
Okay, so other than him, according to what you're telling me, him calling and trying to talk to Joe, what other contact did you have with him after they broke up?
None. He called and wanted to know if I wanted to have my feet done, and I said, with a situation like this, Danny, I'll get another farrier.
Well, one thing I do want to ask you about is in your statement to the police, you were talking about after Joe had broken up with Danny, and they were asking you about that, and you stated that, quote, he would come over to the house and spend the night in the extra trailer that was on my property. Although Joe and Danny had broken up, I would still allow him to sleep in the trailer because I felt sorry for him.
Right. He came over a couple times. He only stayed but a time or two. that was because he wanted to see Joe and she wouldn't have nothing to do with him. But he only stayed 2 or 3 times. That was on Sunday night because he had to go to work on Monday at the cattle sale.
Did you ever talk to him about the breakup with Joe at all?
No, I did one time when they first broke up. I told him, I said, Danny, she don't want to be with you. If she don't love you, she don't love you. You can't change it. I don't care how much you love her. She don't love you. I like Danny. Danny's a good man, and I don't believe he killed her. I'll tell you and I'll tell everybody else, I don't think he killed her, but I think his brother did. He knows what happened to her, but Danny was a whiner and a crier. He'd whine and cry and carry on, and I think his brother said, well, you want her? I'll go get her. But Danny himself, I don't think he could have hurt her. I really, to this day, don't think he hurt her. But he knows where she's buried, and I want to bring her home.
The last witness on day 2 of the perjury trial was Harold Douglas Morgan. He was a friend of Danny Cerezo's, and they put up fences together on the side. They also trapped hogs together and worked cows together. Harold Douglas Morgan and his wife would frequently socialize with Danny and Joe when they were a couple. So the state attorney asked him, after Joe broke off the relationship with Danny, what was his reaction?
He came home from the market without her, and he was absolutely livid. Just cussing up one side and down the other, mad as mad could be, swinging stuff all over the house, on the porch, down at the barn. I can't believe that sorry, no-good MFer left me, that cheating bitch. She's gonna be my wife, and I don't give a damn what it takes. I'm bringing her back here, and she's gonna be my wife.
There was also testimony about a dispute between Danny and this witness over a John Deere tractor, where Danny allegedly owed him $10,000.
There was no dispute. I paid John Deere directly, wired $10,000 to the John Deere Corporation. Their attorney signed that tractor directly to me because he had it on a crop payment plan and was supposed to make payments as every crop of hay came in. He made no payments, and he was 3 payments in arrears to the total of, John Deere said they'd settle for $10K. So I went to the bank, wired the money directly to John Deere, and they forwarded the contract and assigned me ownership of the tractor.
Danny's lawyer said this.
All right, my question was, though, was your relationship strained because of that situation?
And this witness replied,
I'm sure it was when he told me that I wasn't going to get my money and there's a sucker born every day and let the chips fall where they may.
And this back and forth is sort of textbook, where the defense is taking shots at his credibility for the jury, so they have it in mind when they make their decisions about guilt or not. The defense's last attempt was a suggestion that Danny's son was trying to get this witness's wife to leave him and move to Tennessee with him. It was a pretty convenient argument, given the woman was no longer alive to testify about it herself. Needless to say, the questioning got under Morgan's skin at one point, after they asked him if he had shared this information about his wife and Danny's son, trying to get her to leave him, with law enforcement.
I probably told him, yeah, because she told me this kid's trying to get me to run away from you, wanting me to take off to Tennessee with him, and he's a kid. Just like I told the deputies that his brother Joe admitted to committing the murder with Big Danny on his deathbed at Rayford Prison.
And with that, a bit of the air was sucked straight out of the room. I could hear it through the transcript. While these weren't the types of lawyers or a judge that made a big, loud, dramatic moment of it in front of the jury, wisely, that statement would eventually be the reason this case ended in a mistrial. Norgard, Danny's attorney, requested a sidebar, which he got, and basically said, "Dude, he just told the jury Danny's brother admitted to a murder with my client. Hello?" Uncharged crimes, just to be clear, are not admissible in court. The state did what I would describe as verbally wobbling around an argument.
Your Honor, of course, I think everybody was rather shocked and surprised by what he said. From my point of view, he was explaining what he said to law enforcement because the defense was so vigorously cross-examining him, and
The judge interrupted him, and he had the jury removed from the room. Norgard immediately requested a mistrial. The state asked for that not to be granted, and instead maybe give the jury some type of instruction. Danny's lawyer said, quote,
Judge, the only murder they've heard about is the murder of Larry Costine and the presumed murder of Melissa Jo Sermons. Essentially, the only way the jury could interpret this was that Mr. Cerezo's brother made a deathbed confession and that he and Mr. Cerezo did this murder. I don't know of anything more prejudicial that I've ever seen.
I mean, it seemed a pretty cut and dry case of mistrial based on the law, so you might be wondering why the judge didn't call it right then and there. Well, remember, they are all relying on what they heard the witness say. It wouldn't be later until they had the transcript in front of them, and the judge would be able to make a clear ruling. Until then, they continued calling witnesses and presenting evidence to this jury, a jury who would, by the way, eventually find Danny Cerezo guilty of perjury on 3 separate counts. But the judge would eventually rule in favor of the mistrial. Unfortunately, now they are in the process, in fact, right now, of doing this all over again. Another jury, another trial, and I gotta say, in the interest of fairness, that's probably for the better. That statement about Danny's brother and him killing Larry and Joe isn't something that a jury would likely be able to put aside, especially when they're not even being asked to weigh in on the crime of homicide, just perjury. Interestingly, it's not until the closing arguments of the prosecution that the jury even finds out which statements the state is charging were perjury, and that list was much longer before the day that the jury got their list. In the end, there were only 3 statements for them to consider. Defendant never followed Melissa Jo Sermons in any automobile. Defendant never attempted to look in the windows of any home to see what Melissa Jo Sermons was doing. The breakup of defendant and Melissa Jo Sermons was an amicable joint decision to part ways, and there were no hard feelings. By their verdict, the jury believed when asked these things, Danny Cerezo knowingly lied, and each count could be supported by at least 2 witnesses who contradicted his statements.
My husband, Leslie Todd Jones, was Joe Cerezo's bunkmate in Cross City Correctional. Joe was dying from cirrhosis of the liver and hernias related to an old gunshot wound. Joe learned that my husband was also from Polk County, and there were some cold case cards that had this case on them. Joe told my husband everything, including the weapons used, the vehicle they used to dispose of the body and whose name it was registered to at the time, the witnesses that saw them all at the bar in Lakeland before the murders, Melissa, Larry, Joe, and Danny, and also leaving the scene of the crime. We notified authorities, FDLE, and Polk County State Attorney's Office in June of 2007. They didn't want to use my husband's testimony, saying that even though Joe told us things that only cops would know, my husband was an inmate, and therefore not credible. My husband served his time, 23 months, and hasn't ever been in jail again. Joe died. At my outrage of them not pursuing this information, I wrote a story about it that has been published in the Tallahassee Democrat, entitled A Murder in Polk County. I will be glad to answer any questions anyone has.
The Black Parrot was a nom de plume used by the wife of an inmate who Joseph Cerezo had confessed to while incarcerated together. Her real name is Melissa, which you will hear me call her from time to time. On July 23, 2010, she posted what you just heard on a message board related to the Unsolved Mysteries episode on Larry and Joe's case.
You won't find any news articles about a break in the case because I was instructed by FDLE and Polk County State Attorney's Office to destroy any evidence I had on the case after Joe's death. They didn't want the world to know they had screwed up. Destroying evidence in a capital murder investigation is against the law, so I didn't.
The nom de plume alleged that the FDLE used her and her husband as undercover informants while he and Joe served time together. I was able to find her blog, and it's set up as a chapter-by-chapter account of basically how she found herself in this situation. But it's interesting how she met her husband, which wasn't until after she saw him testifying on television as a jailhouse informant in the Nelson Serrano trial, a quadruple murder.
In 1997, Nelson Ivan Serrano walked into Erie Manufacturing and gunned down 4 innocent people. I had never heard the name before, nor had I ever heard of these murders. Nelson Ivan Serrano was about to become part of my life, a name I grew to loathe.
Now, that crime that she's talking about was a few years after Melissa Jo Sermons and Larry Costine were killed, but the man that she'd marry involved himself in both cases. He was a jailhouse informant.
Dear Leslie, or is it Todd? I hope this letter gets to you. I saw you on court TV today. You are probably the most famous jailhouse snitch right now. I could see that you have quite a personality. You made me laugh out loud a couple times when you were being cross-examined. I also noticed how articulate you are. You're no dummy. I feel kind of sorry for you being in isolation, though I can understand why. I thought you might need a pen pal, and I just might need a little entertainment. I live in a wonderful small town where everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows everything about everybody. I have to chuckle when I think about what my mail lady is going to say when she picks this letter up this morning. But I've never been the kind of person who worries about what other people think anyway. I hope this letter brings a smile to your face. Sometimes you have to create your own entertainment, and this is safer than robbing paint stores. I've enclosed a self-addressed stamped envelope and some paper if you'd like to return a letter. I was afraid to send you a pencil. I thought maybe they wouldn't let you have it. I'm Catholic, although I haven't been in Mass in a couple of months. I have a deep belief in God and an all-around love for humanity as well as all the creatures that inhabit this earth. I have 2 Siberian Huskies named Vegas and Reno. By the way, they're vicious. There's a scripture in the Bible about visiting folks in prison, so if there's anything I can do for you or send you, within reason, drop me a note and let me know. Don't consider it a handout, just think of it as a way for me to do my Christian duty. I hope to hear from you. If not, hang in there, and rest assured you're not alone in this world. There's people thinking of you. God be with you. Norma.
Norma, as in Norma de Plume. That was literally her email account name, an account which she would later use to email unsolved mysteries about the Sermons Costine cases.
Dear Norma, thank you so much for writing me. I had no idea who the letter was from when the CO handed it to me. I was quite surprised to read the part about seeing me on court TV and wanting to write to me. It made me laugh. And yes, I could certainly use a friend right about now. Isolation can be quite lonely at times, you have no idea. I'm also a Catholic, and I haven't been to Mass in quite some time. Before I was incarcerated, I attended a little church here in Lakeland. I was born and raised in the Hamptons in Long Island, New York. I ran security for some of the largest nightclubs in New York City back in the 80s and 90s. I have seen a lot in my 43 years. 2 years ago, the mother of my children was diagnosed with breast cancer. My father was then diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and died weeks later. I fell back to drinking hard, and the rest is history. Trust me, I do not enjoy the orange uniform. This is my last time wearing one. I am going to bury my bad habits once and for all. I believe it was Martin Luther King who once said that no man ought to lay a cross upon himself or to adopt tribulation. But if a cross or tribulation come upon him, then let him suffer it patiently and know that it's profitable for him. I've learned a lot from my mistakes, and I know the good Lord will bring me through this. Romans 8, 1-7. As for being a snitch, I can assure you that I had no choice. While I was incarcerated for 16 months, I worked as a jailhouse lawyer of sorts. I helped several hundred inmates with their motions, discovery demands, or bar complaints. I could have made several dozen other cases for the prosecutor if I wanted to. Of all those cases that I worked on, Nelson Serrano was a monster. He executed 4 innocent people and molested his own daughter in 1982 when she was 14. I couldn't sleep because of what he told me. I kid you not. So I had to do what I had to do. Thank you for sending the envelope and the paper, but they don't let us receive anything through the mail at this jail. Inmates can only purchase things off the canteen list, which comes around every Friday. Books are allowed, but they must be soft cover. I won't ask you for anything, but if you ever do send something, I won't consider it a handout. Let your heart be your guide. I can tell from your letter that you are an honest person with a very kind heart. God bless you. Please write again ASAP. And thank you so much. Sincerely yours, Todd.
She initially sent him money for stamps and envelopes, and then he started asking her for other things.
And the requests began, ever so slightly. It wasn't money, as I expected. He wanted names and addresses and documents. These small tasks would eventually get me involved in a host of situations, including an unsolved homicide that occurred in Polk County over a decade ago.
What he wanted was addresses of news organizations and the phone number of an attorney who had previously represented him. Her next quest was related to a homeless shelter called Lighthouse Ministries to track down a box of his legal papers that had been stored there. But her requests of him were more curious in nature.
Tell me more about your cell. Do you have a window? What about the other guys in the area? I mean, I know that you're in solitary confinement, but... Gulp. Why are the other guys there? Do you get to go outside? Can you see the stars? Do you sleep okay? Do you ever get cold? What do you miss most? What's the first thing you want to do when you get out?
Send me a picture. That's a big no-no around here, but there is a way. Print out a picture on computer paper, a little bit smaller than an address label, and get a large 9x12 manila envelope and put the picture face down under the address label. When I peel off the address label, I'll have your picture.
She said Jones asked for a picture of her, but because those weren't allowed, she had her mother make her a pencil drawing, which she sent, and Jones then told her they confiscated it and said he could have it when he was released.
This letter would mark my first involvement in funneling information to authorities. It would also mark my introduction to the criminal world, and the realization that there are good guys and there are bad guys, both in the criminal world and in the world of law enforcement.
She asked a graphic artist friend to take a picture, which they scanned and made it small enough to put behind the address label. It was returned to her stamped as contraband. Melissa tried unsuccessfully a few more times, until finally she got one in behind the seams on the inside of an envelope.
He wouldn't get to see this sketch until months later. This would lead to my first and only crime, one I learned to do well, smuggling contraband into a correctional facility.
In another of his letters, Todd wrote,
Please excuse my handwriting at times. I don't have a table or a chair, and I write on my legs as I'm sitting on my bed. I'm having a serious sugar rush from the candy you bought me. Thanks for the canteen money. I also bought skin lotion, deodorant, and paper to write on. I started reading the book that you sent me and I couldn't put it down. Several stories brought tears to my eyes. Have you read the book A Million Little Pieces by Michael Fry? If you come across it, I'd really like to read it.
The Million Little Pieces reference was funny. First of all, he gave the wrong author. The author's name is James Fry, I believe. But given how that all shook out, I was wondering if he was looking for pointers. For those that don't know, it's a book of lies that got published as the truth. At the time Todd Jones was asking for it, the truth had already come out. So a prison informant asking for a book that was a complete fabrication is a little bit too on the nose. Norma de Plume, a.k.a. the Black Parrot, had also communicated with the folks at Unsolved Mysteries, and this was in 2009, years after the original story had aired in the early 1990s.
Melissa Jo Sermons was killed by Joseph Cleveland Cerezo and his brother Danny. Danny was jealous of Melissa's relationship with Larry Costine. The two brothers ran into Larry and Melissa at a rodeo that night. Later, after drinking at a bar in downtown Lakeland, near the Lakeland Civic Center, the two brothers decided to pay Larry and Melissa a visit. They found the two in bed together. While Joe had a gun on the couple, Danny grabbed Larry's gun from the bedside table and fired it at Larry, killing him. They took Melissa as they fled the scene. Witnesses saw them both at the bar and leaving the scene that night. I'm not sure how long Melissa lived, but I was told her death was not nice. Melissa's body is buried in the green swamp of Central Florida. Joe Cerezo shared the details of this crime with another inmate while he was incarcerated at Cross City Correctional Facility in northern Florida in June of 2007. The other inmate told me, and I passed information along to the FDLE as well as Polk County Sheriff's Department. The Polk County State Attorney's Office refused to bring charges against the two, saying they needed more evidence. Joe Cerezo died shortly before Thanksgiving in 2008, only 9 months out of prison. Danny Cerezo is married and he lives freely on the old family homestead in DeLand. Melissa's body still lies in a cold, unmarked grave somewhere in the Florida swampland. Due to the fallacies of the Polk County, Florida State Attorney's Office, and Sheriff's Department, this crime will forever remain unsolved. Signed, Norma de Plume.
June 17, 2007. Her husband Todd calls and asks her to call someone named Tommy Ray and tell him a guy told him about a murder him and his brother committed that was on a deck of cards. She was tasked to find the deck and go through them and look for a Polk County case matching the description.
Joe Cerezo states that he and his brother Danny Cerezo were originally suspects, but the cops were real stupid. He said his brother took Valium prior to the polygraph. He said the gun used was a .357, and cops came out to take tire impressions, but took them of a truck and ignored a car that was also there. Cerezo said they used that car, which belonged to his nephew, when they committed the crime.
So through her husband, Joe Cerezo starts getting Melissa to do him favors while incarcerated. Looking into whether taxes on his home had been paid, also looking up the names of probate lawyers, and, disturbingly, he also wanted her to track down his ex-wife. She spoke with the county tax appraiser. The property in Deltona in question was registered to a Rita M. Cerezo, that would be his mother, and the taxes were a few months late. Joe was pissed that the taxes were unpaid, and Danny had lied and told him that they were. Joe said that he'd rather split the property 2 ways instead of 3, indicating Joe splitting only with his sister, Judy.
Joe said he's going to kill his brother.
Throughout her notes over the next days, she's trying to unsuccessfully get a deck of those cards into the prison so Todd can get them in front of Joe Cerezo, hoping to get him to talk more about the Costine Sermons case. Then there's a press release that the new decks of state cards are being distributed to prisoners. And Joe sees that story on the news, and he tells Todd that he's worried that the cards will be all over the place because he and Danny, quote, can only get in trouble for the details. The cops are going to be looking to dig up a body all over the place. And he said he'd done his brother a big favor. These decks of cards finally get to the prison in August, and Joe sees them. He freezes, allegedly, when he sees the 8 of clubs. It was allegedly the only card that he read before stashing them in his locker, and then he went to whisper with a prison friend named Mark Ambrose. When I sent you that message, did you recall the names of the 2 individuals, the homicides that I'm looking at?
I know Joe well enough that he wouldn't have said specific names. He would have told the story, but he wouldn't have given a name to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Do you recall a situation when you were incarcerated with him that there was a deck of cards going around the prison at the time, and his and that specific incident being on one of the cards?
Well, he talked about it, but he didn't.
He talked around it, is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, he said, "This is my card." People talk so much when they're locked up, and you don't know what to believe from who, but I remember him saying that about that card.
Well, let me ask you this. Would Joe have known he was talking to an informant? Was he that smart?
No, he was too trusting. He was too open.
So he could have been talking to this informant and giving the informant information about the crime without saying, too many details.
Yeah, right. Well, he had no problem talking about his crimes and more or less bragging on them.
He asked if I would give him a little bit of time to think back and see if he could remember any specific details. A couple days after we spoke, he sent me a text with this message. So what I remember was this. Joe said he never went into the house. He said his brother put her in the trunk. He said they drove her from dope dealer to dope dealer, letting anyone that wanted to have their way do so. Joe said at that point he had to get away from his brother. Beyond that, I don't remember anything more. It goes without saying, or maybe it doesn't, that a career criminal, which Todd Jones was, benefits from making contacts with local law enforcement, particularly if that career criminal, gets jammed up regularly. When they're inside, it gives them someone to reach out to when they're looking to sling valuable info for possible benefits. There was a lot of talk by Melissa and others on this comment board about the corruption of local politicians and law enforcement being why Melissa Joe and Larry's cases weren't being solved. But the fact is, you can't build a case solely on information from a prison informant. You've got to have some manner of physical evidence or circumstantial evidence to build that case, and clearly that never happened here, because where we landed was a perjury trial. Melissa mentioned in her posts as the Black Parrot that Joe Cerezo never gave any details but that they buried Melissa Joe in the green swamp of Florida, and she was told that Melissa Joe was buried on the edge of a park, close to the other victim's home. There is a park a little over 3 miles from where Larry Costine lived back then, the Green Swamp Wilderness Preserve, and that's the east entrance of a larger preserve. But the location does make sense, in the sense that Larry lived off Moore Road, and if you took that about 1.5 miles north and then you made a left at the end of Moore Road and drove about 2 miles west down Dean Still Road, you'd pretty much run into it. With no indication that Melissa Joe was killed in Larry's home, they are essentially transporting a live victim, and one can envision a scenario where even at gunpoint she's putting up enough of a fuss in that car that she's killed inside it, and then they stop at the first place they can think of to bury a body. But here's the problem with that theory. People don't generally carry around shovels with them everywhere they go. So how are these men who don't live in this part of the state burying a body? It doesn't appear, even according to the informant's information, that this was a plan at the beginning of the evening, a premeditated idea to kill 2 people, and they live about 95 miles northwest of Larry's house, so I have a hard time believing that they had the tools with which to bury a body in the car with them that night. That part of Joseph Cerezo's story doesn't make a whole lot of sense, unless, of course, they found shovels missing from Larry Costine's house. Now, they could have dumped a body anywhere on the way home, I suppose, but what I'm trying to get at is that we cannot rely on any part of this jailhouse confession as fact. The other thing we have to contend with is Todd Jones' credibility, which, let's just say, is tenuous at best. As an example of his lack of credibility, in October of 2006, a judge found that he had actually stolen handwritten notes from Nelson Serrano. Because of that, those notes were not allowed to be used at trial. So that's Todd Jones essentially inserting himself into a case, and I am not altogether convinced that there wasn't some of that here in the Larry Costine, Melissa Joe Sermons case. If we are to believe the entire story from the informants via Joe Cerezo, he and his brother took Melissa Joe from Larry Costine's home, and she was subsequently killed and buried. That part of the story has very few details. Despite everything leading up to it, they've leaked alleged details. Are we to believe that these 2 men took her alive from Larry Costine's house and buried her not that far away, risking being seen, because we're bearing down on sunup at this point? It takes a while to bury a body. And from my perspective, what they'd want to do is get the hell out of Dodge, distance themselves from the scene, and then get to a place where they had a little bit more control. Now, remember that witness, one of Danny's friends, who said that Danny was livid and screaming and tossing things around at his place when Melissa Joe broke up with him? And what did he say?
He came home from the market without her and he was absolutely livid, just cussing up one side and down the other, just mad as mad could be, swinging stuff all over the house, on the porch, down at the barn. I can't believe that sorry no-good MFer left me, that cheating bitch. She's gonna be my wife, and I don't give a damn what it takes. I'm bringing her back here, and she's going to be my wife.
So what if they did that? What if they did bring her back to the family property early that morning? What if that's where she was killed and buried? They've got a few acres, and I think it was just as remote and wooded as Larry's place back then. And it would make even more sense if Larry's murder wasn't planned, if the brothers followed them that night, eventually went to Larry Costine's place, skulked around. Maybe they did sneak up on Larry and Melissa Joe when they were in bed together, as the informant alleged that Joe had said. And maybe it was a spur-of-the-moment thing. They only meant to scare him, and things got out of hand, and Larry Costine got shot. Then they take Melissa Joe, and panic rules the rest of the night. I do want to mention that about 8 months after Melissa Joe went missing and Larry Costine was killed, Deputy Gennaro Scarfagliero with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office had showed up at a place called Suncoast Vacations. Police had gotten a tip that Joe Cerezo, would be there, and so they were trying to arrest him on outstanding warrants. The deputies arrived at the location and they were speaking to employees at the same time that Joe Cerezo drove up, so he saw them and he booked. A chase ensued that involved him and 2 separate patrol cars. About 3 miles from the travel agency, Joe Cerezo lost control of his wife's Datsun station wagon onto some railroad tracks, and he got the vehicle stuck. With his service weapon drawn, the deputy demanded Cerezo get out of the car, and he wouldn't. So when the deputy reached into the half-open window to assist him in doing so, Joseph Cerezo grabbed the officer's wrist and tried to get a hold of his weapon. He was shot in the stomach in the process. Now, the warrants that the deputies held that night, one was for an outstanding sexual assault. Police spoke to his wife Lisa after the incident, and she said that she didn't know about those. She only knew about a traffic violation that he had. She didn't even know of his whereabouts until the Thursday before when he showed up at her home. He took her to work on Friday and dropped her off, and so that's how he had her vehicle. And it turned out when he did show up at her job, she was so shaken that her supervisor, knowing their past history, had been the one to notify police that he had been there to pick her up. At the time, he had active charges of sexual battery, burglary, grand theft, manufacture of cannabis, and 4 other lesser charges. What this all gives us a sense of, though, is that Joe Cerezo was a guy who didn't feel like he had much to lose when he took off that night with 2 police cruisers hot on his tail, or when he decided to try to wrestle a weapon away from a member of law enforcement. Another detail that I found curious was the Black Parrot's notes in an entry dated July 5, 2007, where she was doing favors for Joe Cerezo when he was in prison, while her then husband was snitching to FDLE about everything Joe was telling him. Cerezo had asked Melissa, or the Black Parrot, to get numbers for probate lawyers and information about the taxes on the home that he said was his, which it wasn't. It was the family property, in his mom's name at the time, and that's the property on Highland Park Road in Deltona. According to the Black Parrot's notes, the taxes had not been paid in over 3 months on that property, and Joe Cerezo was pissed about it, specifically pissed at Danny. In that note, it said,
Joe said he's gonna kill his brother.
So was Joe Cerezo mad that his brother hadn't paid the taxes on the family property because the home could get taken? Or was there something about that property being foreclosed on or sold to someone else that made Joseph Cerezo nervous? We can't know exactly what happened before the sun rose in Lakeland, Florida, around 6:45 on Saturday, May 3rd, 1992, but there are some things that appear to have been established and confirmed by law enforcement during the grand jury and subsequent perjury trial. While the depositions and grand jury transcripts gave us some information, I got a hold of the search warrant that was obtained in 2014 for Danny Cerezo's fingerprints, and that document outlines in greater detail what police knew, and it described more information from witnesses. The search warrant says that Larry was found lying on the master bedroom floor on top of bed sheets, which were pulled off the bed. And that seems important, pulled off the bed. The autopsy revealed that he suffered from a close-range gunshot wound to the back of the head, another close-range gunshot wound to the left rear shoulder, a graze gunshot wound on the front of his head, and a gunshot wound on the left forearm that they describe as rat shot. Investigators at the time, in 1992, were able to lift 11 latent prints that were recovered from the scene, and 8 total prints were recovered from both of Larry's pickup trucks that were found on the property. Larry's wallet was found in his truck in the front driver's side door pocket, and it had $306 in it. In the glove box, they found Larry's .357 Magnum containing 6 live rounds, but it was determined through investigation that his .357 Ruger Blackhawk was missing, and it would have been loaded with shot shell or rat shot and live ammunition based on an interview with a witness who had provided Larry with that ammunition just weeks before the homicide. So they do believe that he was shot with his own gun. Another thing that is outlined in the search warrant is the fact that Melissa Jo Sermons ended her relationship with Danny Cerezo about 3 weeks before the homicide investigation. When they spoke to Melissa Jo's sister Melanie, she said that Joe received a telephone call from Larry on Saturday at about 6 p.m., inviting her to that rodeo, and she accepted. But what's interesting is that the search warrant says, shortly after speaking with Larry Costine, Danny Cerezo called the residence and spoke with Melissa Jo, and she told him that she was going on a date with Larry Costine, and she told Danny not to come over and that he did not need to shadow her. That might be the call that her mother heard, where basically Melissa Jo told him to fuck off. Some more information that June Freeman, Melissa Jo's mother, said was that Danny was supposed to come to her house on Sunday to work on her horses, and he never called and he never showed up. He also never called her to find out where Melissa Jo was, which she found unusual because prior to that, he was always tracking where she was. Now, Melissa Jo's mother did say that she would allow Danny to stay in a vacant trailer on her property after he and Melissa Jo broke up because he would work locally at the Lakeland cattle auction, so he wouldn't have to drive further. And she said she last saw Danny at that vacant trailer on Friday, the day before the rodeo. Now, Philip Anderson was someone you heard from, at least through my recreated court transcripts, and he also worked at the cattle auctions. That Monday, after the weekend of the rodeo, Danny showed up to work acting, according to this witness, like his old self, and not depressed like he had been during that breakup. Without being asked, Danny told him he went out with Will Adams to the Crow's Nest Lounge and got drunk over the weekend. And this was unusual because no one had mentioned anything about the weekend. It was information he offered himself. After this witness found out about Larry being discovered dead and Melissa Jo Sermons being missing, he approached Danny at the Lakeland auction and told him about the murder, and Danny said, "Well, it ain't me." And later, when this witness confronted him about going to the Crow's Nest Lounge, Danny said he was home all day, and he denied ever going. Now, another witness named Connie was interviewed, and she also worked at the cattle auction, and she said that about a week and a half before the homicide, Melissa Jo had told her that she found something that she wasn't supposed to find in Danny Cerezo's attic.
Now, when Joe and Danny broke up, do you have any idea why they broke up?
I asked. Joe was at the Kissimmee Market. She was doing the call-out pen. She was in the box where they have the microphone that calls out the buyer's name. You've got a pen number for that buyer. So Joe did that. And I looked in the box, and she was in it, and it has that light. She had the sheet, and I looked at her hand, and I says, "Where's your engagement ring that Danny gave you?" She says, "I gave it back to him so I can get my stuff, because he wouldn't let her have her stuff." I said, "Well, did y'all break up?" And she said, "I found something in the attic." And I said, "What'd you find in the attic?" And she says, "I can't tell you." I said, "You can't tell me what's in the attic, Joe." And she says, "It'll get you killed." And I said, "Wow, that's a big word."
But she never said anything about what was supposedly in the attic?
No, sir.
Did you tell the police about that?
They acted like they didn't care. They was leaning up against the wall. It kind of made me mad because they were saying, "Oh, you think Joe could have took Larry Costine?" I said, "Are you nuts? No way."
Okay, well, did you tell the police about what Joe had told you about something in the attic that could get you killed?
I don't remember, hon. It's been so long ago. I was mad. I was ready to get on out of that sheriff's department. They wasn't asking the right questions.
Did you ever talk to Joe about whether she was using drugs or not?
To me, she wasn't. I could tell by looking at her, the way she acted. She acted normal.
Did you ever ask her if she was using drugs?
No, sir. She never looked it. Why should you ask somebody if they don't look it?
Well, I'm looking at a statement that you gave to police back at the time of this investigation. And one of the things that you told police was that Danny told you that Joe was on drugs. Did you ever tell them that?
No, sir.
You then indicated that after Danny had told you that Joe was on drugs, that you asked Joe if she was using drugs.
No, sir. I never mentioned it. I never was asked that or even told them that. And Miss Dalby, this isn't an actual transcript. This is a summary of a detective's... Oh, sir, that's bull. I'm not gonna... That's about to piss me off, because it was never brought up about her having drugs or did drugs, none of that. Now you're about to make me mad because that is not true. Well, Mr. Norgard didn't write it. It's in the detective's report. Well, them detectives, they made me mad because they was leaning on that goddamn wall and acting like they didn't give a flying effer. Because me and Annette, We got mad. We put up listening to their, well, what do you think? And they wasn't even writing nothing down. That's the damnedest thing. As you mention it, they wasn't writing anything down. How would they make a report when they wasn't writing anything down?
And this is interesting because another witness mentioned this.
And just so I'm 100% clear on it, did you say you heard something about her doing drugs?
No.
Nothing?
No, I said I heard she came around some drugs. As far as doing them, I don't believe you could melt it down and pour it on her. She wasn't that type of girl.
Did Danny ever tell you that some of the trouble with their relationship had to do with Joe doing drugs?
No. No, that's never been a part of it.
Okay, again, I'm looking at the statement that you gave to the law enforcement officers back at the time they were investigating this, and I'm going to read what according to the police officers, you told them.
Go right ahead.
One of the things you told them was Joe was doing crank and speed.
No, I said Joe showed me some crank and speed and asked me if I could do anything with it. That's what I said.
So you never told the police that she was doing crank and speed?
No, she's never done none of that stuff as far as I know. Never did, never would.
Then why would you say she had crank and speed?
That surprised me. It shook me to the bone. I mean, I'm a drug addict. Thank God I'm over all that now. I finally grew up at 64 years old, but yeah, she came upon some, and I believe that's probably part of what got them in their troubles. All she did is she told me, she said, I don't mess with this stuff. Can you do anything with it? And back at the time I said, oh yeah, I can probably get rid of it for you, but it was never shown to me again and never spoke of again.
So you were also selling drugs then, too?
Yes, sir. I was selling them. I had to make a living somehow.
And did you ever get arrested for any of this?
Absolutely. I done a bunch of time for meth. Sure have. 6 times in the Florida State Prison. Last time I got out in January of 2011, and I walked off from prison, and I walked off from drugs. I have Jesus in my heart now. I don't have to worry about it.
Now, did you have any idea where Joe had gotten drugs from? Or where she would get drugs from?
I've never seen Joe do drugs at all.
But you saw her with drugs?
She showed them to me in the back of a truck. I don't know that it was hers. She just asked me, can you do something with that? And she opened a shoebox. And I said, oh yeah, I can get rid of that for you.
How much drugs were there?
Looked like there was probably 7 ounces.
What would that be worth?
Quite a bit.
What did it look like, crank or speed?
Crank.
Meth?
Yeah, it was meth. Meth and crank are the same thing. It's all garbage. It'll all kill you.
But you don't have any idea who she would be getting drugs from?
Shocked me to my core. I swear to God it did, because I never dreamed Joe would do something like that, because she just doesn't do drugs.
Do you remember telling the police that you know the boy she was getting the drugs from and that his name was Steve Elliott?
No, never.
You didn't tell police that?
No, why would I do that? Steve Elliott had nothing to do with any of this.
You know somebody named Steve Elliott?
I might. Well, I know a real estate company that's Elliott's. I think they got a son named Steve.
Well, do you know somebody who was involved in drugs back then by the name of Steve Elliott?
No.
Do you recall telling the police that she was also getting dope from Tim Locke?
Shit, no.
Pardon me?
No, Timmy Locke was a good guy.
So you didn't tell police back at the time of this investigation that she said she...
I wouldn't snitch on you if you was doing something wrong, mister. I tell you, I've had about all this questioning here that I'm going to take. That's just point blank. You either change this deal or your demeanor, or I'm through talking, you hear me?
He's got, just so you know, Mr. Comby, it's a police report that was written back in 1993. It's not a recording of any statements you gave. This is what some detective wrote in a report that you said.
Well, it ain't what I said.
And if that's the answer, that's fine. He's just asking you if you actually told the officer this.
No, I did not.
And if the officer wrote it down incorrectly, then that's as far as it needs to go.
Absolutely.
One other thing that the police have in the report here is that according to the statement you made to them, you told them that Joe had told you she had an 8-ball in her car that she had paid $300 for. It was already sold, and that she had bought it from a guy in DeLand.
Negative.
Never told the police that?
Never said a word about none of that. I don't know of nothing about DeLand, except I think Danny was from there, and his brother.
And you're saying Danny never told you about Joe doing drugs?
Never. I'm telling you that that's not part of Joe's demeanor. She did not do drugs, I'm telling you.
Okay, but my question is, Danny never said that she did?
No, Danny didn't either. I don't think. As far as I know, you don't.
The one other thing in the police report I want to ask you about is that this has to do with Danny telling you that he had watched Melanie and Joe smoke something from foil.
No.
Never told the police that?
Never happened.
And then Danny went on to tell you that they was putting something on a mirror and they snorted it with a straw?
Never happened.
Never told police that?
Never happened.
So basically anything in this report, apparently, that had anything to do with drugs that the police claim you said, you're saying you never told them that. And you're maintaining under oath that you never made any of those statements.
Under oath, I never made those kinds of statements, so help me God.
All right. I don't have any more questions.
So that's 2 witnesses now that have taken issue with what they say police wrote in their summaries. There was also mention in the reporting that for several years, Danny Cerezo and his brother Joe were involved in trafficking cocaine from the Florida Keys to Atlanta, Georgia. Did you know him to talk about other violent crimes?
No, they did a lot of burglaries, him and his brother.
Oh, him and his brother did burglaries together.
Yeah.
Well, what do you know about that?
No more specifics. I mean, this was in Miami a long time ago, and him and his brother did a lot of stuff together.
I can see why these witnesses might have felt like they weren't being heard, too. Because if you go back and you watch the old Unsolved Mysteries episode, which you can find on YouTube, you'll see that the original investigator who was being interviewed a whole year after the homicide of Larry and Melissa Joe is saying that he basically ruled out Danny Cerezo. And part of the episode involves the theory that Melissa Joe may have killed Larry and was somehow in hiding. The search warrant also mentions Danny Cerezo's daughter Diana and her partner at the time, Jeffrey Farr, and how initially both of them said that Danny was home all weekend, but they both later said that they lied, and they had not seen Danny after about 8 p.m. on Saturday night until Monday, the 4th. The search warrant says that when Danny was interviewed on May 5th, just after the homicide, he denied ever following or stalking Melissa Joe, and he said that he was home in DeLand the entire weekend with his mother, his dad, his daughter, and her boyfriend, Jeffrey Farr. He said he didn't even know that Melissa Joe was dating other men or Larry. He said he only knew Larry from the cattle auction and he didn't hang around him. But he did offer that Larry and Melissa Joe would argue at the cattle auction, but he didn't know the reason, which is interesting because another witness had mentioned that it was him and Melissa Joe that would be arguing at the cattle auction. And finally, the last bit that's mentioned in the search warrant is that during the investigation, Harold Morgan was interviewed, and he was a friend of Danny's. He's the one you might remember that made that excited utterance about the brother of Danny Cerezo admitting that they had killed Larry and Melissa Joe. That was the statement that resulted in the mistrial. Well, this witness said that he had known Danny since about 1989, and Danny had told him that he should have killed his ex-wife, and that he could get rid of a body by putting a body in a hog pen because wild hogs would eat everything. This witness said that he had seen Danny throwing dead roosters into a hog pen and said, "This is what I'm talking about." He also said that in March of 1991, the year before the murders, Melissa Joe had told him that she was afraid of Danny, afraid he was going to kill her, and she asked him to take back the guns that he had loaned to Danny. And after that, Danny called him and cussed him out for taking the guns back, and he said Joe wasn't going to leave him like his last wife did. He would kill her first. In one report, it was mentioned that the bed had not been slept in, and in the warrant it said the sheets had been pulled from the bed. Police had indicated that they believed the perpetrator or perpetrators were there already, lying in wait, when Larry and Melissa Joe arrived. And you might recall from Norma DePlume's notes from the informant, she wrote this.
Joe said he and his brother were at the rodeo and Danny became irate after seeing his former girlfriend with Larry. Afterwards, they drove a family member's car to Larry's trailer and waited for them. When the couple got there, Joe said he and Danny forced them inside the trailer at gunpoint. Joe claimed he held a gun on them, while Danny forced Larry to give him his gun, which he used to kill them. Joe claimed that he and Danny tried to make it look like Melissa Joe had shot Larry. And then Joe said they dumped Melissa's body in the green swamp.
Mentioning in the search warrant that it looked like the sheets were pulled off the bed could possibly fit with them staging the crime scene to make it look like Melissa Joe had shot Larry. Also, remember, based on the testimony of Nancy Shipman, who had been the crime scene investigator back in 1992, when they were questioning her about the aerial shot, she had been asked, "Down here, does that look like a horse trailer with some horses?" And she said, "Yes, I don't know if there were horses. Oh, yes, I see them." The horse or horses still left in the trailer makes more sense now. If Larry and Melissa Joe had arrived back home and they were intercepted by the perpetrators before they got inside the house. It also makes sense that Larry's wallet would still be in the car, although it's possible that he would have left that there anyway, being that he did live in such a rural area. This search warrant also clears up how Danny Cerezo would have known where Melissa Joe was that night. He called her right after Larry called her and invited her to the rodeo that night, according to her sister. And her sister said Joe told Danny she was going out with Larry and not to shadow her. In July of 2013, the Polk County Sheriff's Department identified Danny Cerezo as a suspect in Larry's murder and Joe's disappearance, and it was reported then that investigators believed they had physical evidence that tied him to the case. In the grand jury questioning of Danny Cerezo, the state attorney asked him if he had ever been to Larry Costine's home. Danny said no. Now, I don't have a fingerprint report in front of me, but what I can say is that if his prints were found at Larry Costine's house or on objects around his property like his trucks, that is compelling information. Danny himself said he had never been there. If one of his prints were there, that means he's lying. And then you have a pretty substantial reason to think he was a part of whatever happened that night to Larry Costine and Melissa Joe Sermons. Sunday, May 3rd, 1992, 4:15 a.m. 2.5 hours before sunrise. The air is calm. There's no wind to speak of, and it's cool in the low 60s. We don't know how long Melissa Joe was alive after she was taken from Larry Costine's house, but every minute that she was brought that sun coming up even closer and shining a big old spotlight on whatever was happening in the wee hours of that Sunday morning. Melissa Joe wasn't killed and left like Larry, and that is a data point that in itself could point to a plan that continued after she was taken from the scene. And staging takes a little bit of time and thought. You have to figure out what you want police to see when they enter the scene. Maybe you put Larry's clothes near the bed and make it look like he just took them off before he climbed into bed. And then you pull the sheets off the bed and maybe stage that body in some manner. And let's not forget the radio playing country music. Did Larry turn that on himself, or was that also a part of the staging? At any rate, while all of this is going on, the clock is ticking, and now there is Melissa Joe alive to contend with, and that sun is going to start to rise pretty soon. Unfortunately, the only thing that's crystal clear is that the state never had enough evidence to make a case, despite what I will say appears to be an obvious appetite to convict Danny Cerezo of something. Because let's not pretend this perjury charge is really about perjury. Not really. I mean, it is, but it's not. I do wonder if the perjury charge has always been about the state trying to get information about where Melissa Joe's remains are. And the thing is, Danny Cerezo had his chance. The state attorney gave him immunity for anything he said except a lie. He could have said anything on that stand and not been convicted for it. That was his chance, and he didn't take it. With the way that one turned out, even with the mistrial, after a jury convicted him on all 3 counts, I have to wonder if Danny Cerezo, who is now almost 77 years old, is recalculating. Because if he gets convicted again, he will very likely spend the rest of his life in prison. I suppose that's what we're all about to find out. Perhaps staring down the barrel of more years than he's got in front of him on this earth, and feeling like his odds might not be great, given the last jury's verdict. Maybe now is the last, best hope for Melissa Joe's family to find out where she is. If you have any information about the murder of Larry Costine and the disappearance of Melissa Jo Sermons, you can contact the Polk County Sheriff's Office Bureau of Criminal Investigations at 863-298-6379, or you can send an email to coldcase@polksheriff.org. If you are a family member, friend, or member of law enforcement that is interested in having your case covered on the Down and Away podcast, you can contact me at deckerjenny@gmail.com. If you are interested in fiction, you should check out the Morneau podcast from my Detective Dex Morneau crime series. Both Down and Away and the Morneau podcast can be found wherever you listen to podcasts.